13th, which is a joint meeting with our Town of Millville, Town of Blackstone, Board of Selectmen, FinComs. We have a great turnout tonight, so I'll call this meeting to order. If we could all stand for the pledge.
I don't think there is a flag in here, so I think on the other side, so we can pledge. Is it this
It's
way?
actually-
Okay, yeah. I can't see it from here.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will start with introduction of members because there are many new faces, and I think it would just be helpful for all of us to know. So I'll start. I'm Erin Vanaco, the chair of the BMR School Committee, and I am a Millville representative.
My name is Jennifer Gill. I'm chair of the Board of Selectmen in Millville.
Lauren Taylor, the Blackstone Town Accountant. Dory Vecchio, Blackstone Town Administrator.
Bob Kuchvitz, Board of Selectmen, Blackstone, Vice Chairman.
Ryan Chamberlain, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Blackstone.
Mary Bolso, Selectman Blackstone. Tony Pollack, Selectman Blackstone.
Ross Nickel, Blackstone Finance Committee Chairman.
Andrew Allworth, Millville WS.
Peter Caruso, Millville Town Administrator and also Chair of the Capital Committee.
Jeff Silverstein, FinCom, Blackstone, and Capital Office Blackstone.
Brad Weissman, Town of Blackstone Finance Committee.
Ryan Berry, Vice Chairman, Finance Committee for Blackstone.
Jim Watson, Finance Committee, Blackstone.
Lynn Welsh, Community Bank Fiscal Advisory Services, Financial Advisor. Casey Vick, Blackstone Finance Committee.
Dan Keith, Blackstone, member of School Committee.
Tara Larkin, Millville Rep for our School Committee. Carrie Goddett, Blackstone Member of School Committee.
Ted Novio, Millville Rep of the School Committee.
I'm Jill Pillagallerani, the Director of Learner Support Services here at Blackstone.
And Jason DeFalco, Superintendent.
Thank you so much. And is there anyone else that needs to open a meeting?
Planning Board. Bob Reynolds, open the planning board.
Thank you. You might as well.
Jerry Finn, Millville resident, BBT.
Is there anyone else that needs to open a meeting tonight? Did you post?
We did post, we don't have
You don't have a quorum. Anyone, do you have a quorum?
Yep. Roll call, Tanya?
Here.
Mary?
Here.
Bob? Yeah. Brian Scanlon's not here, and I'm here. Call me in order.
I'll call a meeting order for the Blackstone Finance Committee. Ross is here. Mr. Jeff, Mr. Silverstein? Here. Mr. Weissman?
Here.
Ms. Noble? Mr. Barry? Here. Mr. Watson? Here. And then, I can't see that far down. All right. All right.
Thank you so much. So we do have an agenda for this evening. School committee wise, we have one discussion item that we'd like to get out of the way, and so we can continue our town work. So I'm going to take our school committee item out of order for C, warrant articles. If any of you tuned in to our meeting on Thursday night, we started speaking about articles that we would need to submit as a committee to our towns for the town meeting. So we're glad you're here, but we did move tonight to have Lynn join us from Unibank on a discussion that we started on Thursday in regards to a capital account and the benefits of bond ratings, et cetera, for that. But did you want to speak to that? I would like to, I'm going to have Jason introduce her and, you know, the information we're looking for. She's here to share tonight. So thank you for coming.
Thanks, Erin. And Lynn, thanks again for being here. As Erin mentioned, we are, the school committee is discussing the idea of having a capital stabilization fund. And so we are at the beginning stages of that conversation. So we thought it would be helpful to bring the expert in to speak this evening on all things capital stabilization and see what questions folks have as we start to go down that road. So Lynn, thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. So I am also the financial advisor to also the town of Blackstone and to the school district as well. And I also work a little bit with the town of Millville, the treasurer, our new treasurer over there. So, but the capital stabilization fund for regional school districts is fairly new within the last 6 or 7 years. And we've seen from my end of things, I work with a lot of regional school districts, a lot of vocational schools that have started these capital stabilization funds. Some of them are to put money aside, if you will, for funding feasibility studies that they may have coming up in the future. And some of them are just for these pay-as-you-go capital items that, you know, it's just better functions, if you will, that pay as you go. And you have the money there when you need it. You don't have to keep going back to the member town meetings for town meeting votes to approve it. And the other side of it, too, the other advantageous part of a capital improvement plan is when you go to the market with the rating agencies, because you all know you're stuck with the 5% of your E&D. So you can't really, in Massachusetts, a school district, generate a lot of reserves, okay? So the capital stabilization fund is a way for these school districts to do that, and it's a credit positive when you talk to the rating agencies. I mean, you know, when you come into play with the rating agencies, and whether you're a district or a town, the first item of discussion is always reserves. So that's a credit positive, and that's something to think about when you go down this path here and you're talking about the new school coming into play. That's a credit positive if you have established that. So the technicality behind establishing a capital stabilization fund is it has to be specific. So it's on the district to come up with their capital plan, okay, and present it to the member towns. The school committee votes to establish it, as well as the member towns. Okay, and the language is very specific, so this would be something that bond council would prepare for the school and also for the member towns to take that vote should you decide to go in that manner. So it's very specific. You guys know it's not just a pot of money, if you will, that goes in and it can randomly go to anything that the school district wants. It can only be used for capital. It cannot be used for any operating. If for some reason you wanted to, the DOR would be the body that would approve any use of capital stabilization for operating, but I can tell you they usually do not do that. So it's very specific. Again, the district comes up with a plan. It's part of the line item in the district's budget, and it would come to the towns as a capital assessment. Okay, so that's built into it would be built into your capital. Any interest earned on the fund stays with the fund, cannot go back into general funds at all. It stays all together. And it's on the burden of the district, basically. Every year, they have to report to the member towns exactly what they used for expenditures, and it has to be very itemized. So it's a lot of transparency with the funds for these regional school districts. So, yep.
Because you mentioned that this number is appropriated to a capital fund and the school can use it. So they say what they use it for, but that doesn't go to a town meeting for approval?
No. The town meeting does not, once you approve it to be put as part of the budget, because like I said, it is a line item in the district's budget, and it comes to you as a capital assessment. So you don't, so if they want to expend money out of that, they don't come to the member towns. But they do have to report to the member towns annually on all the expenditures in the fund.
Do the towns, if it's approved, have any method of approving the appropriations to the capital fund in any given future year?
Yeah, you would come back annually and vote on,
And
the capital.
that separate line item?
Yep, that's a separate
is
line
against
item
the
in
vote.
the district's budget. It's part of a line item in there. It's a capital budget.
But the school has complete control over how that's spent.
Yep, the district treasurer controls the funds in the stabilization fund. So it takes it takes a majority of the school committee and a majority of the member town vote to put money into the fund. It's a 2/3 vote to take money out. 2/3 vote of the school committee. But are you saying that we would have to have a line item
Expensing to deposit into the account yearly? Or is it something we could put in at the end of a school year when
It has to be part of your budget.
there has to be a line
Yep,
item and
it has to be
specified
part of- it has
amount
to be very
on what's
specific.
going
Yep,
into capital? But is there a way to put the money that, say we lost an employee during the year and we had budgeted them the
Well,
full year?
you can put money from other sources into it. You can put money from E&D into a capital stabilization fund. The district can do that on their own. But when you are going to the towns to use it as a budget item, that has to go into the stabilization fund and stay with it. It can't go anyplace else.
But do we have to ask them for money? We have to get their approval to establish the
Yes,
account?
because you have to ask them in that plan. It's like a town where you have your capital improvement plan that gets voted on.
Yeah.
The district would have their own capital improvement plan, and they would be presenting it to both Blackstone and Millville for approval. And then at the end, usually when you get into, towards year end, you start your budget cycle. By now, you'd be probably talking to the member towns, Jason, about, where you're expending it, what you're doing. But it's very specific. It's not,
That's to be spent.
it can't be just, we think we want to fund $150,000 into our, just establish a capital stabilization fund.
In all honesty, the reason this conversation started is because we know we're in a pipeline for hopefully a new project, a new school, or a very big core renovation. And we feel that it's only fair to be able to put earmarking some of that money and being able to go to our towns for a feasibility study and saying, but guess what, we have 50% of that cost already. But where do we keep that until we...
I mean, I was just actually at a meeting last week with a regional school district that is doing the same thing. It's a feasibility study, and they're funding half of the study through a capital stabilization fund, and the others, obviously through the assessment to the member towns. And when you go into the feasibility study, okay, it's, and I really think this is another good reason to establish this and cut down the cost of the borrowing. The feasibility study can only be financed over a 5-year term, okay? So within that 5 years, if you don't have a construction approved at that point, you've got to pay that money back in its 5 years. And if you're talking $1 million, that is a huge chunk of change. So this capital stabilization fund leverages that. And so that's and that's what I'm seeing a lot of right now, is trying to cut back on that expense that would go just in case these projects don't get approved. You're stuck with a 5-year plan authorization that needs to get paid back.
Lynn, and just a point of clarity, it sounded like there were two ways of funding a capital stabilization fund. One is going to the towns each year and asking a specific request, X amount of dollars to be able to fund that. And the other is if the school committee takes or makes a motion to move money from somewhere else to that.
Right.
Right, so those are the two ways. Okay.
But if you want to fund it through a capital assessment to the towns, then, obviously they have to approve it.
That makes sense. Yep.
Can I, so that there's a cap, right, I think it's...
You can't, okay, so from year to year, it's 5%. So you couldn't increase your capital assessment for the stabilization more than 5%. From one year to the next.
And that's an assessment to each town's...
To each town's.
Not the general budget, not the total budget, but the town's contribution.
The town's contribution.
Right. Yeah, so
And then there's also a caveat in there, it can't exceed 5% of the total member town's equalized valuation. And that's, I think we're safe to say we're probably not going to get to that level.
So that's little one, really. It's really going to be a holding spot for projects that we know. I hate to even say this word, we're in the building, but asbestos or a MSBA project. It doesn't sound like, I mean, I didn't calculate what our 5% of the two towns would be, but that's not.
You can expend funds out of the capital stabilization fund for any other purpose that you could borrow for capital under the state statute.
I'm talking
Okay.
about the amount of money that would be allowed to be in there. It's very little money that we're even looking to put on that
Right.
side.
Yep.
To be able to,
Yeah, and then
in
you can,
good faith,
then you
put
can
it
only
towards.
increase it, in maximum 5% increments. So, it sounds like if you're going to start with a small number, it's going to take some time to, get some good balances
It
in
sounds
that
like we'll be
account.
spending it on a feasibility study before we get a balance. So, but,
Yeah, because with the nuance with the feasibility is, usually you would issue short-term notes, obviously, because you want to wait to see what the construction is. But at the same time, the state statute says after you've renewed the short-term notes after its second year and it's maturing into on that third year of maturity, you have to make a mandatory principal pay down. So, so the clock starts ticking as soon as you start borrowing the money for the feasibility.
And if the project is approved.
If the project is approved, then the feasibility takes on the 30-year structure.
Right, it goes
Yeah,
into
it
the
rolls
overall
into
cost
it,
of
yeah,
the project. Yeah. Very good.
correct.
Is there a definition for capital expenditures that is peculiar to capital stabilization fund?
Not sure I understand what you're asking me for. Is there?
What's the threshold for capital items, the financial threshold for a capital item, once this fund is established?
That would,
Is it 20,000, 35,000?
I think it would be a discussion that, like I said, the district would come up with a capital plan and present it to the town. So whatever you decide to start that funding at, there is no cap. It's.
No, I mean, as far as defining what a capital expenditure could be.
Capital expenditure is under Chapter 44, Section 7 and 8, and Chapter 16, 7116D, as far as regional school districts. That will tell you what capital items you can borrow for. And that's the only thing those capital stabilization funds can be used for.
So in the meeting last week, I didn't get to watch the entire thing, unfortunately, but I know there was discussion around what buildings that this fund could be used for. And I know there was a question around, would it just be the buildings that are owned by the district versus the other two schools that are owned by the towns? Would this fund only be just for those district buildings, or are we looking to use it more broadly than that?
What do you, what's your, what?
As Aaron said, our big initial discussion point was around for a feasibility study, which is a district-owned project.
But the regional school district still encompasses all the schools.
Right.
So technically, yes.
You could probably do it in uniform.
It is, right now, when we have a capital expense that's over $25,000 for the two buildings that are leased, they go to the towns. Then the buildings within our district, we bring it to the town floors if it's a larger expense than we can absorb in our working budget. So in my opinion, it would be something that we'd be able to pay for, depending on the account balance. It's not going to be used for curriculum. It's used for the expense, I guess, for structures or other items that aren't related to, an everyday school budget. In the past, it's been the things we've brought to the towns have been the bigger things like boilers or broken sewer pumps from the high school. We've used our E&D funds for feasibility studies in the past for the roofs and the windows. Am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so.
We've never really looked at it like, oh, wait, this is a building and another, and especially now the way our regional agreement is written, the kids are in all the buildings. You have Blackstone and Millville kids in every school building.
Yeah, I didn't remember if the regional agreement was, I thought it did, I just could be misremembering. I thought it did specify something, like, I think there was a threshold or something like that, that if
For
we
the
hit
two
it,
buildings that are leased.
then at least, yeah.
When you come to the towns for the feasibility study in the fall, right, you're not looking for the towns to approve the actual funding of it. You're anticipating either within a 5-year period, if I hear the time frame right, rolling that into a larger project, or by way of something like this stabilization fund, providing for the cost of that should it not be rolled in 5 years in the future. Is that a fair way to describe it?
You want to speak to that one? The feasibility study piece and what's approved in that initial.
So the feasibility study is not gonna be part of, it is what it is. It's a study, and that's going to allow the district to kick the tires with the MSBA to see what is the best project for the school.
Right.
For the school footprint. You'll determine a number, what that number may be with the MSBA. School committee will take the vote to borrow the funds or whatever
Yep.
you're going to do with any other funding sources. And then the towns will have, within 60 days to bring it to a town meeting and an election if you're gonna debt exclude your share. It may be so small if you can offset it that's not the way you go. But this is just for feasibility.
That's right. Yep.
To ask right now what the number is for construction is very premature. It just, because you don't know what the MSBA is gonna steer you towards. It could be a hybrid, could be a whole new building, could be, you just don't know.
Right.
Till you really, they get in and they really pull this building apart.
So I think I will let you ask your one more question, but I think the other question we have for our towns while you're here is what is our deadline to submit our warrant articles this year, if you know them by chance?
We just had a discussion. We can give you the date.
Okay.
We haven't opened the warrant, nor have we set a date to close it at this point for the board.
Yeah.
So you
We
have some time, we gotta do it, we post that warrant 2 weeks before the May 8th annual town meeting.
And warrants have to be submitted before a certain.
Yeah, before that. So.
Okay. If you could let us know so we don't miss a cutoff, I appreciate that.
Does the school district have visibility yet as to what that total for the feasibility study is gonna be?
The numbers we're hearing from MSBA is the same as that we have heard through our whole process, which is somewhere between 750, 1.2 million, somewhere in that ballpark. It depends.
When will you sort of get a final figure?
So this is going to be discussed later, but it's fine to bring it up now. Right now, we are waiting to begin the eligibility period. The eligibility period starts June 1st. Before we actually get to have that conversation with MSBA, we have quite a few kind of check boxes that we have to meet, and then we'll enter into those conversations and then bring that information forward to the towns. And we're hoping in November. So we'll definitely know before then. But right now, we're in this kind of a waiting stage. We were approved, as you know, in December. And then from December to the end of May, they're essentially literally loading all of our information into their database, their system. And we're waiting for that 270-day clock to start ticking, which will tick as of June 1st.
And we do have all that information for you tonight.
Yes,
We kind of went out of order. I didn't want to make Lynn sit through all of this if she didn't want to. So any other questions from the committee to Lynn? Because I know we asked you to come in from our discussion Thursday.
One question. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I think Ryan had a question too.
No, I'll give it.
Is there anything in the thing for the capital, schools capital outlay for a minimum life of the asset to be purchased as a capital item?
Each project statutorily has its own life, useful life, and that's determined by the state. So, and as far as buildings are concerned, school buildings, it's a 30-year maximum. Okay.
It's-
And I would think that, I mean, most schools are doing a 30-year. And that's obviously something, it's kind of premature kind of discuss that options now, but they're usually taking advantage of the
If you were to buy a
full
whole
30.
new computer system that had a 5-year life, would that be capital or not, just for example?
Well, if it's computers as part of the school umbrella of furnishing, equipping and furnishing, then you can put it in for 30 years. But if you're buying a computer on its own, hardware is 10 years, software is 5, statutorily.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a Lynn question or a school committee question. Is there any discussion around, is there like a mandatory minimums amount out of this fund for either special education or for a special education stabilization fund as well?
That would be a separate account.
That's
That'd be a totally
yeah,
separate
The
account.
state
totally
allows
separate.
us to
Yeah.
have three types, right?
Yeah.
Capital, E&D, and special education.
Yeah.
Right now, it's just focused on the, I don't know what
Yes,
the right term is, non-special education version.
capital,
E&D, and this is for capital.
Capital, okay.
capital. So Dan, did you have any other questions for?
So this is this would just be a regional stabilization account. It's simple. So, and I forgot my question because I was listening to Ross, but, and the warrant article itself, it can be very specific. It has to be specific for what it's used for. Okay, so that's a big thing. So it's, at first, when this first came up, I was concerned because the towns have done it the same way for 50 years, going to town meeting. So we're essentially going to town meeting to approve this, and it's very specific for what the funds can be spent on. And then the district reports back to the towns.
It's mandated in the legislation that annually you have to present to the member towns a whole itemized listing of all the expenditures
Right, and
in
so
the fund.
so this particular stabilization fund, and if they wanted to change it for a different use, it has to go back to a town meeting for a different stabilization fund, or?
Well, I think DOR has to approve it first.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever it would be, say if it was for the feasibility study, that would be very specific for raising a stabilization fund for the purposes of a feasibility study.
Correct.
That makes me feel much
Yep.
better.
Any other questions for Lynn? Or can we let her go? Sure.
So the capital trust for town, can be used for town-owned buildings, correct?
Capital stabilization?
That's correct. So right now, the towns take care of their own school buildings. They're responsible,
Over $25,000.
correct? You're saying that if you establish this fund, the district can then go in and spend it for either town-owned building at their own discretion.
I think it depends on the language that we
Yeah.
would propose in the warrant
It's
article.
how you want to structure
Yeah, it's
it.
however we want to set it up.
So would it be the 25,000 that we have to pay before we hit that threshold, or would it be the full amount?
Be the
Is
full-
what your question is?
It would be the full amount, correct? Because you're establishing a capital trust. So let's just say one of the town-owned buildings had a $50,000 expense. You, at the discretion of the district, has the ability to go in and spend that money out of that fund, regarding what town it is, right?
It would depend on how we set up the
How you set it
capital
up,
stabilization fund. So if we drafted, being the school committee drafted language for that and brought that forward to the towns and it passed, then yes, if that's not what the language was written as, and it was written as putting a capital stabilization fund in place to be able to put towards a feasibility study, then that's what it would be used for. So essentially, the school committee would set, the language that they would like to use moving forward, and then the towns would have an opportunity to approve or not approve that language.
And I think with that, just that specifically, we would actually have to change our lease
Yeah, we could just do
documents
Correct.
if it was going to override that. But that would definitely be more of a conversation.
By the agreement. we wouldn't be able to go over that. We wouldn't be able to break the agreement over the 25,000 without going back and amending the agreement, and that wouldn't fly. So,
I'm just,
yeah.
Yeah,
I have the same question, Bob, the other night.
point of clarification, that's what that was.
Thank
I just
you.
want to
Yeah.
clarify it, so,
all right.
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Lynn.
Lynn, thank you.
If we're funding this as a line item in the budget, would we then be funding it from the general fund because it's part of the overall school budget?
It's a capital expense.
It comes to us, when you get your operating capital assessments
your
from the
capital
district, the letter, the assessment letter, it would be under your capital. So it's apportioned as you would your, per the agreement, how each member town is assessed
Paying
on
on
their
roof
capital.
or paying on,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it would be a warrant article at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just like every other capital.
Thank you so much.
Lynn, thank you. Super appreciate it. You are more than welcome to stay.
Or exit stage left.
Go back to sandwich and come back again.
Thank you, Lynn.
So my office, I'm gonna say close tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
No, you can keep
All right. So we're going to move back to and start our FY '24
Okay.
budget discussion, yes. And I think Jason has a
Yes.
quick
So
presentation for us.
I have a brief slide deck that I just want to take a few minutes and walk everybody through to give you a sense of where things are right now with our FY '24 budget understanding. I hope everybody can hear me. I hope I'm speaking loud enough. Can you all hear okay? Okay. To give everybody a really good sense of where we are in our draft FY '24 budget, I want to underscore the word draft. We do not have a final budget until it is certified by the school committee, which is early to mid-March. I think it's March 9th is the public hearing and then the certification for this year. So what you are seeing tonight is a draft. What you have all received up to this point, and I think it may have come through the town administrators, which essentially is like a function code sheet that shows the function code summaries, the FY '23 certified number, the FY '24 draft number as of a particular date. I think it was sometime in January. And then what the percentage change is. Know that a lot of that has already changed. This is the struggle we tend to get into at this time of year because we're not done yet. But we want to make sure that you have all the information possible as we work through this process. And so we'll delve into this and walk through these briefly and then talk about next steps. I share this as an anchor for everything. This is our district improvement strategy. This is why we're doing the work, and this is how we're doing the work. And I want to underscore this notion of where everyone is welcome and belongs, because all of you at the table this evening are welcome and belong. And I'm looking forward to a collaborative, positive conversation that's about kids tonight and how we best service the children in our two towns. So as far as our budget process to date, and again, I'm not going to read all the information to you, but those friends of ours that have returned, that have done a few fiscal years with us at this school system, this will look familiar to you. But I will share one of the things that was a little bit different for us is we actually started these conversations in the summer. And when we are a few slides in, you'll see the why behind that. As we've had a lot of concerns about FY '24 for various reasons that, again, we'll delve into momentarily. But we did start these conversations very early, not with numbers, of course, but more so just around concerns that we had and knew that we would run into as far as barriers with FY '24. As we typically do, we have started this process very, very early. We start in October. You will probably notice that somebody is missing from the table. Those of you that have been here a few years, as you know, Matt has moved on to another district. And so we have been doing all of our finance work absent of a finance director since June, but are very proud of the process that we have used and of the budget that we've put together to share with you. So any questions that you have, again, our returning friends, you normally would have probably reached out to Matt to. By all means, reach out to me. Give me a call. I'm happy to jump into the numbers and have a conversation as we continue to work through the next few weeks of our budget process. But we did start very early We included the voices of everyone at the table that needed to be very much involved, including teachers, including paraprofessionals, custodians, working with our administrative assistants, of course, our principals, our cost center managers, meaning our music director, athletics director, lots of individuals at the table to help us really put together what we would need to bring forward for our students next year. We started with the school committee at the December 9th meeting, and we had a discussion about what we kind of call like the staff and stuff. So here are the priorities we have for kind of the people and the materials and resources. What you're going to see this evening is a budget that actually has no new positions and is actually reduced by 3 FTEs. So we actually reduced our budget by 3 full-time positions. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the why behind that. As a promise, frankly, that we made to all of you when we started out our recovery work from the pandemic a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago. I don't actually quite, it's all blended at this point. I can't tell you what year it is. And then from there, had an opportunity to hear directly from our cost center managers, again, meaning our principals and directors, to the school committee, and really kind of delve into the weeds. This year, the budget process was really different because we're not asking for anything. We're not asking for new materials. We're not asking for more positions. What you're going to see tonight is really a level service. It's just what we're doing. And so, unfortunately, as all of you know, the what we're doing is way more expensive now for a variety of reasons than it has been in the past. But we've done a lot of good work to date, and we will continue that. All of this is in service to our 1,468 students. These are our demographics. Our English language learner demographic has changed as recently as this week. We're
already up 3%.
Yeah, we're up to 3%. We are, and I'm not sure if you're, noticing on the town side, but we are super diversifying our schools, which is a huge asset to our school community. And we're really excited about that. So these numbers are as of October 1st. We always give our October 1st enrollment because that's what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education bases everything on. So this is our current enrollment as of October 1st. And actually at current day, we're up to about 1,500 students. If you include our out-of-district students, which we've got about 23. Jill, is that right? 21. 21 out-of-district students. So this gives you a sense of our student demographic and the families and children that we are serving in the district. This is always, to me, one of the most important slides. This is how we're doing. So these are, again, kind of various state-determined measures, but they're important checkpoints to make sure that we all have a sense in terms of how we're progressing with our state's accountability system. The state sets targets for us and says this is how you should be doing BMR, and so we like to report out on that to our communities so that you have a sense of essentially return on investment and how we're doing as a school system. We have, at this point, none of our schools requiring any state intervention, and while that certainly is something we would hope for, it's something that is important to mention, just so those around the table that are new to this understand. Our graduation rate is just under 95%. Our drop rate is 2.7%, and the important piece, or 2.2 rather, the important piece to mention about that is we did have an unfortunate situation happen last year where we had a few, because we have school choice, we had a few students at the high school level who choiced in, actually never came and withdrew from school. And that is a strategy, unfortunately, that some of our neighboring high schools like to use. If they see that there is a high schooler that is at risk of dropping out, why don't you attend BMR? They have school choice. It's open all year. Go on in, check it out, try that fresh start. And in last year's situation, I believe it was 3 students that actually never stepped foot in the building other than to register. There is nothing we can do about that. That is a state statute, and it is the way it is. But what I will say is our guidance staff works very hard to re-engage those students, even though 2 of the 3 we actually never met. One we did, he came for a day, I believe. But they are working to re-engage those students. When we re-engage them and re-enroll them and put them in a plan for graduation or for their high set or GED, we actually will be able to get back credit on those numbers. May not necessarily mean a lot to our folks around the table, but at the end of the day, it's an important piece to be able to wrap your head around. Our achievement data is interesting. You will notice that we are either at par with the state. In most cases, we're a little bit below in high school math. Science, at the high school level, you'll notice there's a couple of different assessments that are being used. We have an old MCAS test and the new, what they call it, the legacy, and the new MCAS 2.0 for science, and they're in the process of phasing out that old MCAS legacy test. And there are different testing options for kids right now, from biology to physics to a general science. So the science at the high school level's a little harder to wrap your head around about, like, how are we actually doing compared to our counterparts, because every high school in the Commonwealth is doing something a little different as the state continues to phase out the old bio exam. So you'll see over the next year or so, that will condense to one assessment, and we'll have one proficiency rating on that.
Can we retake the bio exam
Yes.
now under the new? Okay, that'd be better.
Yeah, so we actually have a retest in February, and then the next retest for bio is in June, and then they'll have a November retest.
What's the range to be considered meeting or exceeding? Because I see math at 40 and the state level is 50, but that means we're still meeting it, even though we're 20% off, we're 8% off.
So the numbers that you're looking at are the meeting and exceeding percentages. So the state average is 50% for 10th grade math. We were at 40%. So we were about 10% below the state average in 10th grade math. Is that what you were asking?
So if we were at 39%, would that mean we were not meeting?
No, what you're looking at are the actual numbers of students, percentage-wise, that are meeting the grade level expectations. If you look at 10th grade math, you'll see the meeting and exceeding state average. BMR high school is at 40%. The state average is at 50%. So all the 10th graders together on the math test, 50% of them are passing the math exam.
It's a bucket. It's anyone that's either meeting or exceeds or done in that 40%.
So it's the state average as compared to, we're a bit below the state for 10th grade.
Is that just like 10th graders? There's like 96 10th graders? So
Yes.
40% of them are meeting, the other 60%?
Are either partially or not meeting. Yep. Most of our students that are not in the not meeting category, you probably, I don't know if you're looking at MCAS data there, you might see it. Most of the kids are in the partially meeting. So that means they've passed, but they're just, depending on where they scored, a bit below the meeting expectations column. But they have technically met the graduation requirement of passing the MCAS.
Some of us still have the books that you gave us last year.
Yes.
So your projected enrollment for 23 was a total of 1,516 kids. But obviously it's a 15 kid difference, and you had said for different reasons why that was, so.
Yeah, so.
Just off of your projected numbers for this year is kind of what we're looking at right now.
So we had a really interesting thing happen last spring. We saw a drop in our student enrollment by about 170 students. We, of course, had students move in. And when we drilled into, we had more than 170 students leave, frankly. But when we drilled into the exit information, that's actually the number of students that moved out of both towns. So, say we had 200 students leave the district, 170 actually moved. So it could be one family that has a sibling group of, 4, right? So there's a lot to unpack there. Our projected enrollment was lower because we didn't anticipate so many move-outs with that. Are there any other questions on the state determined measure? Just always good to check in terms of where we are. So shifting more to the fiscal side of things, I wanted to give a quick update on our grants. I know that many of you know that we are very aggressive about grant writing in the district, which we're really proud of. However, grants have an end date, as you all know. And you can see we listed here And you'll have a copy, I'll hand out a copy of the slide deck when we're done, but we have a list of all of the end dates to our grants next to each of the amounts. This certainly isn't all of our grants, but these are the bulk of some of the larger ones, or some of the programming that we wanted to highlight. But you can see that we have many of our grants coming offline within the next year. So this is just important to know when you think about what the budget is going to look like for this year and possibly future fiscal years. We will continue to be very aggressive in our grant writing, but this is always an important piece to share so that you can see that we are aggressively seeking other funding sources, other funding streams, but many of them, will come offline. We'll go for other grants. We'll write extensions for those that we can and try to continue the grant funding as possible through this fiscal year and future fiscal years. Two important grants, and I highlight these only because you might have already seen this or heard this, but this will show up in your draft FY24. So these dollars are the last of our ESSER 3 dollars. So if you remember, we had ESSER 1 that concluded last year, right? That was the COVID relief money. ESSER 2 that is concluding this June. So those dollars will be done June 30th of this year. And next fiscal year, so FY24, our ESSER 3 dollars will be gone as of June 30th. So that'll be June 30th, 2024. We won't be able to expend those dollars any further. So I wanted to reference that here because we also, as you can see, we are funding these positions with ESSER 3. And our Title I, this is an entitlement grant, but it's important to note because all of Title I we've always put towards our positions, but these are the individual positions. You can see we have 3 reading interventionists that we are paying with our Title I grant. But this is important to note because this is going to help offset as an additional revenue stream the overall budget as far as salaries go. So I just wanted to bring this to everyone's attention. And this is about $400,000. So before we spring forward, I want to look back. I think it's important to do that. And I'm glad some of you have your budget books. I have the last 3 fiscal years if anybody's interested in the certified budgets, because I think it's important to show a history here. I know budget season, budget time, it's always kind of budget season, can feel tense, right? I've said this repeatedly whenever we talk about people's children and money. It can be an intense conversation. Now put them together in the same conversation. And so I want to just quickly run through the past couple fiscal years just to remind folks where we were and then where we ended. Because where we started the process was not where we finished the process. So I want to make sure to kind of remind everybody of that. So in FY21, when we were building fiscal 21, the state assigned to the towns a very significant increase in your minimum local contribution. The district has no say over that. We have no voice in the matter. The state determines what the towns are responsible for as far as education. And then for fiscal 21, they increased Blackstone's MLC by just about 5%, it was 4.9, and Millville's by 5.06%. So before anybody could do anything, before we could talk about staffing, services, whatever we needed to do, the state said to the towns, you're on the hook for this much more money. Right? So that always puts the district in a really tricky spot because we know what we need in order to service kids and putting the programs in place that are necessary. That fiscal year, we had to go back, you all like the expression, sharpen the pencil. So we had to go back and sharpen that pencil. We reduced our additional requests by $550,000 that year. So that came at the tune of $412,000 to Blackstone and $137,000 to Millville. We had no increase in Chapter 70, and that got the overall assessments, minus the capital, that year to the towns, 3.4 for Blackstone and 1.3 for Millville. So that's a quick, just kind of snapshot of where FY21 was. FY22, the state eased a bit on its minimum local contribution increase, although they still increased it. Blackstone's went up another 1.7%. Millville actually saw a small decrease in about 0.8% that year. That year, the best that we could do was to look at our revenue streams. So using all of our grant dollars, we actually used $965,000 to offset the town assessments. So that we were able, as a district, through grant funding, we were able to absorb almost $1 million to help try to bring the assessment down. That was also the year that was the big Chapter 70 increase that everybody got. That didn't come to districts like us. We got $30 a student. So we got about $30,000. That's about half of a teacher, just FYI. There was really a minimal to no increase as far as Chapter 70 was concerned. But overall, Blackstone's assessment that year was up 3.8% and Millville's was about 1%. Last year, you may recall, was a really challenging fiscal year in terms of planning because the state, again, increased the minimum local contribution to the highest we've ever seen. Blackstone's was up over 6% and so was Millville's. So again, right out of the gate, before we were able to do anything, the state assigned a significant increase to both communities. So we did what we have done in past years the best we could. We looked at how can we decrease our additional and how can we use our grants to offset our assessments. So we actually brought the additional down. Total for Blackstone, it was about $287,000, and for Millville it was about $127,000. So that was a decrease of about $400,000. And then we used all of our grants in our our circuit breaker money to help offset the assessments by $1.6 million. This was why we started those conversations in the summer. We don't have that this year. And so we knew that the ESSER dollars were drying up, but we also knew some positions would come offline. But this 1.6 million, we don't have 1.6 million at this point, especially in grant funding. However, last year, all of this resulted in a 3% increase to Blackstone and a 1% to Millville. I say all of this to say we have worked incredibly hard with all of you to do two things. One, and I'm going to scroll all the way back to do this, which is to fulfill our promise to our community and service the children in our community the best we can while putting forward a budget that our towns are able to support. And so as we go through this process this year, I promise you we will try to do the exact same thing. So I just wanted to look backwards before we spring ahead. So what is driving the FY24 budget? And I just want to touch on a couple of these very briefly. We'll be starting our second year of our new strategic plan, and we call that Blueprint 2.0. For those of you I know that have been kind of tuning into that and really paying attention to the district improvement work, which has been incredibly significant over the past 5 years, thanks to everybody in this room investing in our schools to make sure that our children and staff have what they need. So a big thank you for that. We continue to work on minimizing those non-academic barriers. I know mental health is something that everyone in this room, I'm sure, has heard repeatedly on the news, various meetings. I can say to you very proudly, the work that this school district is doing around mental health with kids is working. It is working. We recently gave a presentation to the school committee, updating the school committee on the status of our mental health in our students, directly from the students. And we're very proud to see that our children have made significant gains. And you know, while that might sound kind of warm and fuzzy, it's really important. Because if our kids aren't healthy mentally, they're not learning. And I'd be happy to share any of that information with any of you. This year, we are finalizing the selection of our social studies, our new core social studies program. And it's important to mention at the end of this year, our school district has a core, cutting-edge, research-based, high-quality English, math, science, and social studies program. And I challenge any school district in our area to see if they have the same thing. We have put a ton of investment into our curriculum because if you don't get the backbone right, then what are we doing? So our teachers at the end of this year will have a new social studies program. And then that will complete the core areas, and then we'll keep going back and refining and revising as we go through the next through fiscal years. And then lastly, we are maintaining a very strong focus, not just on the college prep side, but the career readiness work that we've done. And those of you that have been through this process with us the past few years know we've put a ton of resources, effort, and energy into this. Even so much as in 2 weeks, we're taking a group of 15 high school students to the Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce to do some training on some of the virtual welding equipment, to learn some of the soft skills, which aren't really soft skills anymore, they're called something else. But that's kind of how it's being framed, and then to do a tour of a couple of our local manufacturing plants. And to meet with some of our hiring managers there to see what they're looking for. This is coming off the heels of having taken them to Worcester State a couple weeks ago to actually tour their campus and hear directly from their advisors over some of the college opportunities that await them as well. So we're very much staying focused on both sides.
50% of students classified as high needs. How does that compare with surrounding towns or peer towns?
That's a great question. So as compared to our neighbors and friends in other communities, we have other than Milford, we have one of the highest high needs populations in the valley. So again, that is a combination of families that are eligible for free and reduced lunch and or qualify for a state service like SNAP, our ELL and or our special education. So it's a combination of those indicators.
Jason, we still have that program with Uxbridge?
Yes.
We share its students.
Yep. So what Bob is talking about, we started in the Blackstone Valley something called BV Excel, Blackstone Valley Excel, where our students at our high school have an opportunity to take courses at all the other high schools after school for additional credit. And they're all career-focused courses. So things like engineering, manufacturing, cybersecurity. We offer a culinary arts program here. We'd offered a video lab program here. So students throughout Blackstone Valley also come here and take courses for credit. No cost. We wrote, a small group of us wrote a $500,000 grant to get the program funded. So that's been a great, huge asset. Thank you for asking that.
I think that's, the public knows that that's out there available to the kids.
Absolutely. Other factors that are driving the budget. This is the not so fun slide, but very important. Health insurance costs, transportation. We're in year 2 of a new transportation contract. I think it's important to note that when we were building our FY23 budget, we were still in contract negotiations with our transportation company. That those finished after we certified the budget. So you're going to see some transportation increases in FY24 that might leave you scratching your head. And I'm happy to address those, but the gist of that is we now have a new transportation contract that came into play after this budget was certified. So those numbers are accurately reflected in FY24, our draft budget. The state has increased.
Jason,
Yeah.
on the transportation costs, you guys do a bid for that process, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I think the past year we had 2. We had 2 that answered the RFP.
There's not many
No.
around this area, so.
Right. The state has required school districts to pay 14% increase on all private tuitions. That has nothing to do with us. That was assigned to every school district in the Commonwealth by the state. Myself and the Worcester County superintendents are meeting with our legislators tomorrow to advocate, frankly, for help and support here. But you will see some of the work that Jill and her team has done to try to reduce those special education costs. Our special education collaborative has increased their tuition by 10%. I will share, I sit on this board, I did vote no when they did the initial vote for that. I did not win that vote. But I think for the fiscal viability of the collaborative moving forward, I certainly understand the need to do that moving forward. And so there have been 2 years of increases on that. But it does make sense in terms of sustaining the collaborative needs of our students with special needs that are in that program. Of course, our facilities needs. Our contractual obligations are around 3% just on their own. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Again, the big variable, our state assigned MLC, we just don't know what that's going to be yet. We have no governor's numbers yet. I know none of you do either. School safety detail and increasing the school safety is also a piece, as are our utility costs, which we'll talk about in a Many of you have asked for a detailed budget. We have that for you. So when we're finished up, we'll hand that out. That will give you an opportunity. You can take that, you can go through everything, reach out, ask any questions. We can come and speak at your FinCom meetings, your Board of Selectmen meetings. We want to make sure that you have time to go through that. You didn't have that before tonight because this is a living document, and we're still constantly combing through this. And so you will see that the numbers that I think you had from the town administrators are even different than the numbers you'll get tonight in your packets. They're different. And I guarantee you that they're going to be different again by the time the budget is certified, because we just keep going through this process. So we'll definitely have an opportunity to look at those, and you can leave with those in your packet this evening. Here are kind of the headlines, and I think these are really the most important pieces to take away. In FY24, we have eliminated 3 positions. We've not added any new positions. We have contractual obligations that are just about 3%. Our heating costs are up 24%. Our utility costs, which are electricity mainly, are up 32%. And we have gone out, we're working with 3 different vendors. We have solar, we're trying everything we can to get this number as low as possible. We're dealing with a state-assigned private special education tuition increase of 14%. Our collaborative tuition has increased 10%. We have a contract for transportation that has increases in the mileage rates, the gas costs, the weight fees, which is when a driver brings the basketball team to the game and they have to sit and wait for the game to be played and end. We pay an hourly rate for that weight fee for the driver and for the bus. And then there's an increase in our minimum bus runs. We have applied already $400,000 to salaries. That was the ESSER 3 in the title grant slide that I had showed a few slides back. And we are in the midst of looking right now for additional offsets to the town assessments. But without those additional offsets right now, the overall budget as it stands is at a 3.4%. That is with all of these increases and with the reductions, no new positions, and the 400,000 in offsets. So I think where things stand right now, there's still work to do, but I can say to you very confidently that the school committee and the leadership team as a whole, all the cost center managers have worked really hard to get that number to a 3.4%. And again, the big variable is what's going to happen when we get the governor's numbers. That's one of the biggest next steps. Because until we get the governor's numbers, I don't know what the revenue streams are going to be. So our focus for this fiscal year was just to be very hyper focused around expenditures first. Let's get the expenditures right, which is what we've done. Now we're looking at offsets, potential offsets, while we're waiting for the governor's budget. When the governor's budget comes in, that will let us know what our Chapter 70 is. It'll let us know what our charter school tuition will be, what our school choice tuition will be, and what our reimbursements will be for both school choice and charter. And additionally, our reimbursement for transportation. So there's still a lot of work to do, but this is where things stand now and our next steps moving forward.
Is part of the delay because of the new governor?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're given, I think, it's 8 weeks once they
it's-
come into office.
Pretty much everything's, been postponed. We're all on holding patterns across all the agencies.
So we're using this time to try to get through that expenditure and really, and as this group knows, we've presented budgets before here upwards of 8%. So I mean, we have been, and of course we never landed there, as you saw the last few fiscal years, but we've been working diligently to try to get this number to a place that we can all work with.
Yeah, they're very behind. Because we actually had our budget hearing on a Sunday, and I've never had to do that in 8 years prior. So, like, they're way behind, and they're trying to play catch up. I do want to highlight one of the areas you said, the utilities. I just wanted to make sure you're aware, and obviously with our town administrator, but the board's going to be looking at many of the surrounding towns have been entering into bundling with the utility companies. Uxbridge just got their electric costs to go from 33 kilowatts down to 15 and a half, 16. And it's an opt-in, opt-out program. So It's really up to each resident if they want a bundle or not. But we think it's a good idea that we look at that for the next town meeting, and put it up. That would be the start of the process.
Yep.
But any way that we can help, I don't know how the school district, I would assume you guys could fit in somehow into that process, or I don't know how that works with Millville too, but we want to make sure you're aware of that.
It'd be
I think
great
it's
to hear more
something
about
that could really help everybody moving forward.
It'd be great. It'd be great to hear more about that for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We do work with we have a collaborative French River that we do a group bid on oil. We only need about 40,000 gallons. It's not a huge amount. So we don't have enough kind of bargaining power on our own. So we do our bidding with French River. So it's maybe a similar kind of piece.
With the FTEs, how many total FTEs do you end up with after eliminating the 3?
So we are that's a great question. So those are Unit A positions, so they're in the teacher bargaining unit. And so we're the largest employer in the 2 towns. We have about 300 employees. So would be a little under that. It's about 290. So we're a little under that.
And then when do the key union contracts expire?
We are in year 1 of our teacher union, which is our Unit A. So it's teachers, guidance counselors, adjustment counselors, school psychs, nurses. We're in our first of a 3-year. Next year, we will be in the last year with Unit C. Unit C are the paraprofessionals, the administrative assistants, the custodians, food service. So that's like almost like the other half of our bargaining units, if you will.
And just to follow on that, when you say 3% increase in contractual obligations, so that's the blended, a 3% increase. You know, if you look at the individual steps and lanes, those are pretty significant increases, especially if you move a lane, and you've got big increases on some of those stipended positions year to year. But I understood you also had some retirements and you got some new people coming in. So you add it all up, I guess. It's not just a COLA, it's the blended everything is when you say 3%.
Yeah, and so, and those are the obligations, right? So, but you'll look, when you looked at your function code list, you probably noticed the classroom teacher line was about 2%. And that speaks to a little bit, Peter, about what you were just talking about, where the special education line was about 10%. And that there are so many variables there between what step people are on and that they're moving to. Also variables of who retired from which position and what we replace them at. We will pay more for special education teachers, respectfully, because they are working with our most needy children. So we want very experienced educators working with those students. And so, yep, sometimes you'll see that difference.
I appreciate that. And so your last version of this was a 3.8% increase. You're down to 3.4, which is great. So we'll expect you to be at 3% next time.
See about that, Peter.
Yeah.
Just for trying to come up with some standard going through, would it be possible to give to the Finance Committee a per pupil expense, which would allow for the reduction of it, and also a ratio of staff to student ratio?
Sure. So yes, the staff to student ratio is fine. That we can pull that for you. We can do the per pupil amount too. The only trouble with doing that now is the budget isn't done. Usually we calculate that at the end when we have a certified number, so we actually know what that actual rate is going to be. I can give you this year's rate, if that works.
If you could do it for 2 or 3 years,
sure,
would be definitely helpful, because dollars are very inflatable right now, and they don't really give you a true understanding.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because as I mentioned, the superintendent Worcester County organization, we're meeting with the legislators tomorrow. The other thing we're talking about is the inflation rate. And the fact of the matter, which I'm sure everyone around the table knows, is that Chapter 70 is set at an inflation rate of 4.5% when we're dealing with inflation rates of anywhere between 8 and 9%. There's $450 million there that is not accounted for that we need to be able to close that gap. So we have a very intense meeting tomorrow in Worcester with our state senators and reps about that issue, about the universal lunch and breakfast, and about the out of district special education tuitions. We got to pull every lever we can. Other thoughts or questions? Okay. I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Well, I think if there aren't any other questions about this presentation, we can move on to the MSBA conversation. But
Is there going to be a separate capital presentation? Capital?
we're going to talk about our
capital-
project. Is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
no, I mean an overall capital plan.
Yeah, the capital assessments?
So what I'm getting at is, the town of Blackstone last year began the process of formal capital planning. And we made some progress on that. But I did contact our town administrator and Bob to basically say that we need to get an integrated view of our capital planning for the town of Blackstone that includes both the schools and the municipal side. So I personally have not seen the 5-year capital plan for the schools, and we haven't really even finished our municipal capital planning as well, but I certainly would like to make a lot more progress on that than we've seen so far.
So respectfully, maybe you're blocking it out of your memory because it was a $60 million price tag in terms of what we needed to do to address the capital. So we did, I know you were attending.
About the facility study?
But that facility study is what is going to be driving the capital expenses moving forward. Yeah.
Fair enough, but I know there are more, there are additional items, not just the buildings, but there are other capital items.
Oh, sure.
And
sure.
so that's sort of what I'm getting at. I want a real complete capital plan. And from our side, from the municipal side, we're not just talking about buildings either. We're talking about vehicles, we're talking
Sure.
about all kinds of things. And we have all kinds of balls that we're juggling right now in terms of building acquisitions, buildings that need to be upgraded or replaced, and we can't move forward with those things until we have numbers to work with. And right now, I would say that we are flying in fog in the dark by the seat of our pants. And so, anything, we need numbers to move forward with capital planning. And we need, a 5-year outlook. We know that there are huge numbers that are going to come out of the school side over the next 5 years. And we need to have visibility, regardless of whether it's an estimate or not. We just need to be able to move forward with some planning.
Sorry, but just to follow on that as the capital guy in Millville. It's my understanding in this budget, you have capital items which are principally debt service on existing debt. And in the case of Millville, you've gone out to bond the boiler project,
Yes,
right?
that's
And then separately, you have the asbestos remediation here at the high school as part of the capital requirement in the operating budget. But you're not coming to the towns with capital items, just as this gentleman's talking about, in terms of within that 60 million, if you want to repair the buildings, you got to do this. But we also know that you have things that are needing attention, the higher priority items in the short term. But it's my understanding you're not asking for money from the towns to fund any of those at this stage of the game. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, so right now, we have put our emphasis on the actual building structure themselves, particularly as it relates to a new building. Because that frankly is going to fix a large majority of what was in that facility study. So we've been focused very much on that and really, putting that forward
There might be
as.
some things in the next, until such time as there actually is a project and you've gone through the feasibility study and things start happening on a building or buildings.
Sure.
Until that time, I presume at some point in the not too distant future, you're gonna say we're gonna need 150 grand for fixing the, you know, the walls or whatever, I don't know what, but, you know, those higher priority items, this stairways so nobody gets hurt, those types of things.
Yeah, right now it's just debt service and the asbestos.
okay.
Yeah.
Right, well, so let me just, the capital planning, I think, I am very concerned that we can go down the road for capital planning, and the first hurdle is the feasibility study funding. That's the first major hurdle that you're going to have to face, because both towns have to approve that at town meetings, right? What do you do if that funding doesn't pass? Do you have a plan to move forward with your capital items without that funding?
Yeah, so we would start executing the plan that's laid out in the facility study, which is frankly to the tune, and it's laid out, you know, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years out. So we would follow that plan and move forward, requesting the resources from the town to fix those issues. That's about a $60 million over.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
you know, I'm familiar with that plan, but I'm also assuming that that plan could also be modified, and then the next step, if you pass the feasibility study funding, if you fail at the overall project funding, then I'm assuming that you're going to have to go back to the drawing board, I'm assuming at that point, and come up with something very different from what's on the table right now.
So the challenge with that, we won't really be able to do that because the majority of that $60 million are sitting in that building. And frankly, the boilers, the windows, all of the structural work that needs to be done, MSBA doesn't do accelerated repair projects anymore. So there's really no drawing board to go back to. We need a new building at the end of the day. And so if that doesn't go through, I would say as a community, we're going to be in big trouble. Because we have boilers that were installed in 1969. We have a building that we are working with DLS around to make sure that it's safe, but that has quite a bit of asbestos in it. And so I don't know what that drawing board looks like, but I can tell you the bulk of that $60 million is right in this building.
So the plan now is to not renovate and to build a new one?
The plan is to do the feasibility study and then let them tell us what to do.
As far as that,
We put in
are your
for
actual thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
so we put in for in our statement of interest,
Yeah.
an addition renovation, like it's called an ad reno, because and I'm sure you remember, I know Ryan, you were part of these conversations, but we discussed the idea of maintaining the auditorium, the CAF, and the gym, and just renovating those spaces.
Yes.
And building a new facility off to the right side of the building, and then moving the children over, and then taking down this part of the building.
Yes, because I want to do it without interrupting learning, because
That's
we're
right.
talking about putting the different mobile classrooms and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And to MSBA, they refer to that as an addition renovation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about a year ago, you came, people from the school committee came to the finance committee and gave us a plan as to the financing and everything. Has that changed, or is that still the basic plan that we're dealing with?
Are you referring to the discussion that was around the possibility of a new building?
Around the possibility of how long it would take between the different financings with the feasibility study, phase one of this. Is that still the underlying procedure we go through?
Yes. The costs, as you heard Lynn say this evening, far better than I will, but don't even, she was saying, like, don't even try to figure that out yet, because we're too far from that to be able to put a number on it. In terms of, we also don't know what MSBA is going to recommend we do. I don't know. But we put in for an addition renovation.
Would it be possible to get 3 recent feasibility studies that have been done on similar sized projects, high school projects, like the three most recent ones that would be comparable to what we're planning to go through?
Sure. In their costs? Is that what you're asking?
I'm not so concerned about the cost. I'm concerned about what they'll actually tell us. Because if we're gonna go for $1 million for a feasibility study, I would like to know what information we're gonna get out of that $1 million.
I think you need to be careful there though, because you're not comparing apples to apples. Every district, every school is going to be very different, and all of the schools are on the MSBA website that they have granted into this program.
Yes, yeah, that is
You can
public.
see all of them. It's public. You can go through. You can see what the last 10 years worth of costs are. I mean, the one thing that I will say, and I probably should have already stopped speaking at this point, but we really need to let the processes play out so that we can actually understand what we are discussing. Every time we get to these points, we get to these, well, what about this? What about that? I want to be able to, whether it's other projects that we have going on in the town or this one, I want to talk about what the actual specifics are so then we can weight the merit on the project, not hypotheticals of what's going to come in. Now, it's good for planning, and we've been sitting around, this is the third one we've done, where we talked about the problems in this building and the capital projects that we need. But it's super important that we actually talk about and debate the merit of the projects that are before us. That's all I'll say.
And I can only speak to it because we had to submit something to MSBA. So I always go back to what we submitted.
Ryan, to your point, I'm not so interested in the actual cost figures and that kind of thing. I'm interested in the methodology. I want to see the methodology of how MSBA approaches these projecers.
It's all on their
Yeah, it's on
website.
MSBA's website. You can, that's why I said yes so quickly, because I can just download it from their webpage.
It's a very clear process that MSBA has developed over the years. There's modules you have to go through. They will direct the architect that's selected to look at 3 options. It's not, we don't go in there and say, this is what we want.
And me and blanking, Jennifer, Gil, we sat at the meeting with MSBA when they came, and I was shocked at how thorough they were. The things that they talked about in this building, they went through everything. I mean, they didn't want to hear anything about you had a presentation, they're like, nope, we're not doing that. We got questions. And they went through and, crushed the school committee and the superintendent on why you should deserve to be part of this process and how competitive it was. And I left there, I remember telling the board, being like, if I walked out of that meeting, I would never thought we would have even gotten this far. I thought it was over right there. So they obviously thought that there were major issues here to even put us into the next program. I won't speak to all of it because this isn't my expertise, but it was very thorough.
I felt the same way.
Yeah.
And the other thing that sticks with me on that is, and we were at the very beginning of their process of the visits they were doing, and we were still at the top of their list. So they know better than we do what they're looking at and what the deficits are, and we're still at the top of their list.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not saying I'm for or against, I'm saying these are the realities of the projects, and this wasn't a slam through process. It was extremely thorough. And it was
What we said. They went around, they had their GoPro, they looked through everything, up and down, they did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As we get closer to this, can we get when we bring this committee back together, when we get closer to it, a representative from MSBA to give a full explanation or questions, questions that actually, as we get
I don't know
closer
if they
to
do
it.
that. I don't know if they come out and do that.
Generally, you get
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. The OPM will come out.
yeah, exactly, yeah, it didn't
yeah.
have to be from the MSBA,
Yeah.
but yeah, as it goes through, especially before it gets to a town meeting, so that all these questions, especially with the deciding bodies to move it, recommend it before a town meeting, can have their questions addressed.
So Jason, you have an update for us tonight, a similar handout or?
Yes, yeah, as far as where things are now. So technically, we have been accepted into the pipeline, into right now this kind of pre-eligible.
Before you get, I think this is gonna be an interesting conversation. But if our enrollment number, we're looking at like 1490, because I thought I saw something under 1500 on a slide, like slightly below that for this upcoming year. We're at like 1565 in 2022. What's your biggest concern, or what to solving this declining student enrollment number?
So I think there's a macro answer to that question, then there's kind of a micro answer to that question. I think the macro part, we are right. So the jarring number to me was 170. That was a jarring number to see that many children, again, not all unique families, but left the two towns, right? And that really left me with the question of
Can you
what.
clarify left? They didn't leave the school. They moved
sold
out.
or they
Right.
didn't renew their lease and they moved.
Yeah.
They left our borders, right? That speaks to me to a different issue. Like, what was the issue? There could have been any number of factors, right? And I'm not going to pretend to know what those are. But one of the things at a macro level that I come back to all the time, the schools in the towns really need each other. Really, really need each other. We live and work in a place that, both communities are really more kind of bedroom type communities where there's not a ton of commerce, right? There's some, but there's not a ton of commerce, not a ton of business. So what draws families to those communities? Really good schools, right? I mean, that's why people that come, they move here. They want to raise their kids here. I'm sure most of you did that for that reason. And so I think there's this kind of relationship, again, at a macro level, where the towns and the schools need to work very hard, side by side, to put our best face forward as a collective unit all the time. This is a great place to work. It's a great place to raise kids. It's a great place to go to school, right? And there's a narrative there, I think, that needs to keep changing collectively. It's almost like a culture, right? A climate culture piece. On the kind of micro level, I think there are things that we need to keep doing like we're doing. Increase focus on career development, increase focus on programming, updating our facilities. I think we need to bring in the footprint, but improve the product of the actual facilities themselves, which is part of the overall vision for where we're trying to bring the school. Let's run less square footage, but let's run better square footage that is actually cutting edge, that's going to, cause parents that are looking for a place to move their family to kind of pause and say, hang on a minute, isn't that the school that, right, fill in the blank, and they drive by, like, this place is beautiful. I think there's like this collective kind of macro micro thing that needs to, and I think it's, to a certain extent, we kind of take a step forward, we take a step back. We take a step forward, we take 2 steps back, right? So it's this dance. And I think we all need to be going forward, as cliche as it sounds, like together, collectively, not pointing fingers, but instead pointing ahead, saying, let's all move in the same direction. Does that answer your question?
Right.
Okay.
I really think facilities are going to have a huge impact on our enrollment. We've lost kids when Uxbridge had their new high school. They had the beautiful facility. They didn't have anything that we have inside of it. We have that now. Jason has brought us a lot of growth in the last 5 years, career development, mental health. We have it here. And back to his words on the macro, micro, like, we have to have the facility to support it. Yeah.
Do we know if the majority of those students who moved out of our towns went to neighboring towns, or if they just moved out of state?
We do. We collected that information, and it varied. Some moved out to Western Mass. Some moved Woonsocket. We had some families that left and moved to Woonsocket. We had some that moved to Florida, New Hampshire.
Connecticut.
Yep. So a lot of them left. Like, they left.
It's kind of a pattern, though. Like, we're not the only district that's seeing that. It's with post-COVID, remote workforce is now kind of a standard, so a lot of people can now move where they want. They're no longer tied to the cities or tied to where they, so we've seen it in, other towns as well. So.
And I think that's the attractability piece. Like we need to Aaron's point, like we have incredible things happening on the inside of this building. Now we just need the outside to look like that, right? And to show that. And I think we need that relationship there.
Jason, I think what people watching this need to understand, this school is 54 years old. And we heard from Lynn tonight, the shelf life for a school is 30.
Yeah.
So we're almost at, 25 years over where we were.
Yeah.
I mean, we've
That's
gotten our
hard.
money's worth
Yeah.
from this facility. I
Yeah.
believe when it was built for $4 million. I believe that was the price tag back in '69.
Wow.
So look what inflation rates are, but we've gotten our money's worth from this school.
It seems like it's a challenge. I watched your program, the Zoom meeting you had last month. That was excellent. I don't know how many people watched it. Seems like, compared to the population, probably a handful like most cases. Like just trying to get the right messaging out there. Because you go and you read a warrant, we need $1 million for feasibility, and without the understanding, the thought, the need, that feels like that's going to be an ongoing issue between now and that time.
So, I don't know who said it over here, but what's the backup plan? I think it was you, Jeff. And the honest truth that came to me when you said that was we need it to work. So we need all of you to, be moving forward with us to get there so we don't get caught without a backup plan because it's a 54-year-old building. So I think it's very important. I know you just mentioned maybe MSBA. There has to be someone that can come in. I don't think it will be them, but that can work with us, OPM, to make sure that we're always on the same page. We're going to be seeking out a building committee, of many townspeople. And those processes are what's always been done when there was a middle school built. We have to do it together because if we don't have the word out, then people do come to a town meeting and vote down. All they hear is $1 million. And then another reason we want to be able to put forth some of that money in good faith is because they are only hearing the dollar sign. They don't even understand what it's for. So
to your point, operational cost-wise, I remember when you had a meeting about condensing schools and it caused an uproar with some people because they didn't understand the overall long-term reason why. Do you know what your budget-wise, what it would be, whether you closed one of the schools, condensed, what you're gonna save for that year? And if that was something to look into, would that be money that you would be looking to take and start and put into that account?
It's a great question, and one of the many considerations, and we do need to downsize the footprint, right? Like we're running too much square footage. I think everybody would agree with that. But one of the challenges that we have to work through with MSBA are the roofs, boilers, and the windows on the complex. We just finalized those projects a couple of years ago. We just refinanced them and finished the bond, and in terms of the financing for that recently. And so, as we go through the feasibility study process, there will need to ultimately be conversations with MSBA because they granted us, fiscal resources, money to, half, frankly, to do those projects. Yeah. So the ultimate question is how does that factor into the overall cost for a new facility? Is there going to be a clawback on that? Do we end up negotiating those costs into, an overall bigger project so the town's not left, on the hook kind of paying for that directly or separately? There's a lot of different variables there. But at the end of the day, we have about twice the square feet that we need. And I'm actually glad you mentioned that because the other thing to keep in mind, and it's part of the eligibility period, so what we'll enter into June 1st, Erin mentioned forming a school building committee, but one of the many things we need to do is we need to certify our design enrollment. So MSBA is super clear. They will not build us a building that is a square foot bigger than what we need based on our enrollment. So it is very likely, frankly, that the new building will be smaller than this building because this building was constructed for, it was 795 students. Depending upon that grade configuration, I don't see that necessarily being over 550, 600 kids. It could end up there, but I don't, it's doubtful. So it's probably going to be smaller square feet. But all of those pieces play together.
Where are we, 6 months ago, we came out with a two-school program. Has that died off, or are we?
In the MSBA, you mean what we submitted to Mass School Building Authority? That
To
was
the
the
Mass
two-building.
School Building Authority, and it came public at one time for this one and the middle school and the elementary school in Millville, being the 3 retained. Is that still an ongoing approach that you have, or is that died off?
No, it's still a discussion point, and I think, Mary, you said it well. Like MSBA is, like, we're not going to tell them what we want to do. They're going to come out and say, here are like 3 different options. So, as far as what ultimately the grade configuration looks like, is it 2 buildings, 3 buildings, what is that going to be? That's really teased out in feasibility. That feasibility study, I cannot underscore enough the importance of that, because that's where that will come out.
I would just say, after having gone to a great many town meetings over the last 30 years, that you're going to have a very hard sell for $1 million for a feasibility study if you can't tell the people what you're trying to get out of the feasibility study before they approve it.
I can tell them what we're trying to get. We need a new high school. But is it going to be a 6 through 12, a 7 through 12, an 8 through 12? That I don't know. That's to be teased out in the feasibility.
Maybe you've answered this before. How long is that feasibility study good for? So like, for instance, let's say we spend $1 million. Is there ever, well, let me back this up. Is there ever a time where if we got the feasibility study, that the MSBA doesn't fall through on the next phase? And we're sitting there with a feasibility study
No.
for $1 million? Okay.
They guarantee us that money.
So, but that's part of the, right? Like if you do one, the other's going to come. It's not like we're going to be sitting here with a $1 million plan that we can't do anything with.
No, that wouldn't happen.
Jason, the middle school debt drops off in 2025, right? Is
Yeah.
that school's paid for?
Yes.
So you gotta keep something in mind. By the time we even get to the point where we think of a construction phase for a new high school, we'll have that debt relief from the middle school. So that money that we're already got committed will now go away. So we'll be able to actually use some of that money for the renovation, right? I mean, because the timing's gonna line up perfectly for the project.
It's actually, there's a few gap years because we will not start paying on a new project until,
Yeah, there's 330,000 left on the middle school.
How much work needs to go into
we're probably going to have about 5 years.
Depends on the configuration.
From
If
no
we don't turn it
payments.
into an early childhood center and putting the pre-K and K down there, then we wouldn't need to do anything. As far as that goes, I'm not saying there won't be other projects, but as far as, during the development of the statement of interest in our capital planning meetings, we had discussed, because you have to submit a plan. So we discussed that as being an elementary school for the little guys, all the way through 5th grade. But to do that, we had to retrofit the bathrooms on the first floor. All of that came to about $7 million. If we didn't do that and just left it as an intermediate elementary, kind of lower grade middle school, then other than whatever projects we need to do there anyway, at some point, it wouldn't need any of that retrofitting.
And we're hoping that we're not like suffocating ourselves, but we're hoping that MSBA would see that and say 2 buildings may not be enough. We don't want to be in a predicament where we don't have enough space. So putting all that money into a middle school renovation to make it I hope they back out of that, honestly.
You're not really building for growth then, you're really building, if we have
For what we have.
1,005, whatever, I know this is 1,516 students, that's what you're building for.
That's
not
what
building,
MSBA will allow us to build.
will allow us to build.
We can,
I don't
yeah,
mean
if
you,
there's something
but
else we want to do, like the collective we as a community, then you all can decide. It just wouldn't be part of their reimbursement grant.
Is there a conversation with MSBA regarding the forgiveness of debt for the complex?
There will be, there hasn't been yet.
Okay.
If the ultimate decision is to take that offline, then there would be some negotiations with MSBA about that and what's left on
My
those.
understanding in just brief conversation is it's less payback, more reduction to what we would get on a percentage.
Yeah.
The money, nobody's going to have to front that money to pay it back.
It's part of the project.
It would reduce the project.
It would be nice if they gave us debt forgiveness.
That would be a goal.
It would be.
Dan, did you have?
With that, though, that's 58% was paid by the state, that's the town of Blackstone's, on that, the boiler, and the roof and everything else, so it would have to be very clear that however that's, that's rolled, if that's rolled in, or if town of Blackstone's gonna hit that, get that thrown back at them. So, it would be good if MSBA forgave it, of course, but.
Any other questions? Yeah, Peter?
So just to be a cold bucket of water, as you're talking about all this and it means taking on new debt, you still have the OPEB debt and other legacy debt to contend with. And I think one must always keep that in mind here. And I think at this stage, from what I understand, the plan is remaining at 100,000, not in the budget. You're looking for the towns to pony up the 100,000. The liability based on the actuary report, it's 43.6 and 630.22. It goes up $1.8 million every year after that. So the 100 grand is not necessarily. It's more a rounding error, I would say, than making a hit on that. So I know that in our next capital committee meeting, we're going to have an agenda item to talk about that and how we, as a capital committee for the town of Millville, might want to make a letter to the school committee about OPEB debt. Yes, so one of my favorite topics. So thank you for letting me bring that up.
And it's important to note, we'll say it here, that the school committee contributes each year once our E&D is certified. The teachers are putting in $20,000 annually from their own pay toward that as a contribution. That was in our last round of negotiations. And then, of course, we get our contributions from the community. So we're working hard at all angles to try as quickly as we can to try to address that issue. Yeah.
If I can just add on that, just to be clear, the OPEB liability has always been on the towns, not the school district. It's the town's responsibility to fund, and it's been since day one, as Mr. Watson, as you know. But and the school is contributing through its E&D as well as the teachers in the last negotiation, so.
I would just say that it's not totally, I think the funding requirement will flow down to the town in any event. I wouldn't quite say it's totally the town's responsibility.
It is, it's in the original agreement and the new agreement, it's always been the town's.
The only other part of my agenda that I need to fulfill is public forum. Was there anyone else here that wanted to address the committee? Other than items on our agenda? Sure.
There's $1 million, the $750 $1 million feasibility study, that has to be voted on for the towns to approve that, right?
Yes.
So then there's like marketing collateral and like you get the mailer every day to kind of tell you to vote in favor. This is how they did it in my hometown. But that gets us the feasibility study.
Just to be clear, that's illegal from us. If an outside group did that kind of stuff, I just want to make sure that's clear. Just for the general public to know that that's not something that the government can do.
So the $1 million gets approved by both towns. Then there still needs to be another vote to fund the schools, correct? So technically, you could pass $1 million but fail a school referendum for dollars.
Yes.
Technically, you could lose your $1 million if the towns don't vote in favor of the school.
said that there's only a 5-year.
But that's a possibility.
Right, and then the hopes are, once it's approved, that short-term feasibility rolls into the 30-year project
Yeah.
payment.
So you do a short-term 5-year bond.
But if it fails, you're paying that back in 5 years.
5 years.
So yes.
Like I think that's what you're saying,
But,
right?
right, it is a possibility.
Yeah.
That's the point I wanted to
So
say.
MSBA has had 85%, just over 85% of their new school buildings approved.
So it does happen.
Do you have a number of?
Not often.
It does happen.
If the school
Not often.
committee was
We
to
don't want that.
open that account, do you guys already have a number of what you're gonna start it with? Based off of, you kinda already know what the feasibility study's gonna be, so that's kinda gonna be a cushion for when you go to the two
We
towns
have
and
not
say,
talked about it as a committee.
you know,
We need to. It is an up-and-coming agenda item. But we
cause that's
don't
gonna be
have it.
completely different if you guys have some money already set aside.
Right,
Right.
To then
In
come into
good
town
faith.
meeting
Yeah.
and explain to both towns that you don't need that much coming from the community.
I learned that in one of my very first years on school committee. It was a roof project, and
Well, it could
I
potentially help.
didn't understand any of it and the process, but the school committee took money out of their E&G to fund, I believe we paid for the feasibility study back then. So whatever the cost was 11 years ago. Obviously with the hopes that the towns would foot the bill for the project that was at hand. So it has to be a conversation between all of us.
But it is one that's gonna happen
Yes.
soon.
We're moving as quickly as humanly possible on all of this. What's coming around are the handouts for tonight, the slide deck. The couple of slides on the MSBA process and where we are, and the budget detail that folks asked for. If anybody has any questions after reviewing that, don't hesitate to reach out.
And it was like, it was almost 9 o'clock, and I was like, and then BM,
You guys have them. It's what, yeah. You probably don't want those papers
So
anymore,
I'm
but-
looking for a motion to adjourn. By Perry, second by everyone. Second by. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, everyone. We will.